Hello everybody, Monday evening, here we are again. Anyone else feeling knackered? Is it just me? I'm getting out for 90 minutes a day walking, so I'm getting my 90 minutes white light, but today has been the first day where I've been like, whoa, somebody needs to come and take me away somewhere for a few months. Mind you, the government might do that soon, so who knows? Might get a free trip somewhere, mightn't I? Be quiet, Emma. Get yourself into trouble. How are we all? I'll just wait for a couple of seconds until people join. It is hard at the moment when the dark nights, I like the coziness. You kind of start thinking about Christmas and cinnamon, nice smells and stuff. Not that I have a sense of smell, but I remember it vaguely when I did have a sense of smell, that those kind of times smelt nice. But it's also just dark nights and dark mornings, isn't it? Just really plays with the old melatonin and serotonin levels, doesn't it? Cutting out alcohol and everything now because of the fact that I'm like, right, just got to nurse this kind of year. This time of year is a place where you've got to get healthy. Doing a juice detox tomorrow. Not a juice detox as in where you just stop eating anything because like I'm northern. I can't go without my tea. That'd be a terrible idea. But just to like kind of get my body in order. You know when it's got to that kind of year and you start feeling, and you think, right, I've just got to do something. So anybody else on board with it? Anybody else doing some things to get the health back in order? After a year and a half of just constant frustration, I think most of our immunities are going to be a bit compromised, aren't they? Forget the rest of the babble and all the other stuff. Also, just a shout out before I start, as I always say to people who are here, this is a place where everyone's welcome. Twitterverse would have you believe that there is only vaccinated versus unvaccinated in the world right now. And it's a pile of bollocks. It really is. It's hard to describe it in any other way. But the idea that the majority of people out there care whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated is just a myth. There's a tiny percentage of the world on Twitter, a tiny percentage of the world, right? Tiny. And it's also from a particular political persuasion on the whole that are the loudest voices on there. And it's a very, very, shall we say, over-woke situation on that level where it's not about free opportunity to speak and discourse and all the things that makes us a happy human race. Because the thing about dialogue and words is that they're very powerful. Like words have the power to kill or create. They really do. And it comes from expressing oneself and testing out one's theories in conversation and being able to play with those different perspectives and perceptions and then either redefine the way that you think and feel or change, grow. All of these things are very important. That's why therapy exists really, because sometimes people don't have the opportunity to do that. So we create a safe space where you can play with all of that stuff till you figure out what it is that you want and need. And maybe it's just because Twitter has got such a tiny amount of words that people are highly aggressive and to the point because they don't have the nuances that are required usually in language. I don't know. Maybe it's a particular subtype of individual who gets particularly aggressive. But what I would say is that we've got to remember, no matter what, the vast majority of people outside of our homes that we meet in the street, they couldn't care less if you're vaccinated or unvaccinated. What they care about is that you're a nice person. That has been the way, particularly in the UK and the Western-centric model for aeons. It is the way it should continue to be. And anybody who comes here, it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're super vaccinated and really happy with that and just want to carry on forever doing that, that's great. That's power to you. Equally, if you're somebody who's anti-vax, because anti-vaxxers get a horrendous amount of backlash. I mean, I get put in the anti-vax category. And even though actually my children are vaccinated, which makes no sense whatsoever in the fact that I'm abused that way, but nonetheless, so what if people are anti-vax? I don't get it. Some people I know are incredibly health conscious and they don't believe in putting anything in their body. They don't have paracetamol. They don't have painkillers at all. They don't take any medication, neither do their children. I'm not going to pretend they're not healthy. They're probably the healthiest people I know. So I can't go out of my way and be judgmental that way. And I think that that's what this is about. So I'm just saying that at the beginning because I've had a lot of people who are struggling with the idea of getting their boosters, who are clearly vaccinated, but they're having questions about whether they want to and what that means for them and the pressures that they're facing from their hot families. I've had people who are worried about their kids and so on and so forth. And I think that this divisive attitude of particularly Twitter There's a lot of paid chills on Twitter. There's a lot of 77th Brigade, who are an army, actual regiment, who go online and attack. That's what they do. I'm not making that up. You can look it up. And because of that, it's not a very nice environment to discuss genuine feelings of issues that we may be facing in a way that receives a compassionate response. And I'm just putting it out there because you all know how I feel about the world right now, and the fact that we can't keep being divisive this way. It's ridiculous. But also just the fact that maybe we need to get better, because we don't know how social media affects us. You know, it's brand new. We've had millions and millions and millions of years to arrive where we are, and we've had like a few years for social media to be part of our lives, and that means that we don't actually know what the long-term impact is going to be on our society and ourselves. So we have to be really mindful of that. Anyway, it's not a rant. It's just a little bit of dialogue, exploring my feelings around this. So somebody actually said before, and in line with quite a few people who've got in touch with me about children having vaccinations and stuff like that, about the fact that boosters have come out and people are worried about the fact that they don't necessarily want them and that their family really want them to have it. And I'm going to come down on the fact that I'd always say it's got to be a completely subjective decision for you. I don't know whether it's the right thing for you to do. I think that what people have to realise is that it is the same as the other two shots, essentially, isn't it? So it's just another one. And to some degree, that means that there's going to be another one and another one and another one, and you have to make a choice which road you go down. Some people are really happy having flu jabs every single year. Some people aren't happy doing that. So you have to make a decision for yourself. What I would say, though, is nobody should be pressured by anybody. Like, I don't understand that parents and friends and family members, it's because they care. When it's a please have the vaccination, it's because they care. They're not trying to do it to be antagonistic or problematic or nasty. It's a genuine place of love. They're saying, I love you, I don't want anything bad to happen to you. So you can appreciate where that's coming from, but you also have to step away from the emotional blackmail of that and think about what's right for your body, is what I'd say. So personally, even though I love wine, I wouldn't, in spite of friends and family maybe trying to ply that opportunity for me to have wine every night, it wouldn't be something that would be good for me. It's an objective and subjective experience different, isn't it? The objectivity of another is different to the subjective experience of the individual. So try not to get into conflict. That's what I'd say as well. Try not to get into conflict over it. Just be like at peace with your own decision. What I would say, however, is if you are feeling coerced by other powers, such as social media or the government or a situation with an employer, then I think that's a very different situation. And I think that you should hold true to your beliefs, as I will. I think holding true to your beliefs is a really powerful thing. You know, what do you want and what will make you feel best? And I often think that conscience is really helpful for us. So like when I do something wrong, I know I've done something wrong because my conscience just beats me up. It really does. I mean, sometimes I'll ignore it and then I just feel a deep sense of shame and guilt. That's why we have conscience. That's why I think that human beings are more than just animals. Not that I don't think that animals are more than animals, by the way. I believe sentient beings are incredible. I believe that dogs and cats and everything in between definitely have sentience and explore the world as sentient creatures. But I'm saying for me as a human adult animal, I believe that my conscience is there as a part of me knowing my moral compass. And I don't think that's to do with being brought up. I think it's something inherent and everyone's got a different one. So I digress, but that's what I'd be saying. Hi Emma, it's coming up to trauma anniversaries of sexual assaults. I'm living with emotionally abusive and controlling parents. I don't and can't currently move out. I earn too much to get assistance but have debt and a horse to pay for. Here's the one thing keeping me alive. I'm on waiting list for mental health treatments. I've seemed to get no further forward. I've had 2 assessments and a third one this week. Then it's likely to take a few months for treatment. I've been going around in circles since May. I just don't know what to do anymore. Do you have any advice? Well, if you're earning a reasonable amount of money, there's different things I'm going to talk about because you're saying you've got emotionally abusive and controlling parents. We'll put that to the side for a minute. If you have money and you are earning a reasonable wage, then you could look at private therapy. If it's trauma-based, I would look at something like EMDR or schema therapy. So your best bet is to look up a clinical psychologist who's got EMDR or schema therapy training, or a registered psychological therapist, BACP, but they'd be MBACP accredited, and they might have EMDR as well or schema as well. So I'd look at those options because that will give you an immediate appointment and hopefully mean that you can start desensitizing the trauma. That would be one thing. The investment is worth it. If you've got the cash and you can actually afford to see a private therapist, which it seems like you can because you're staying at home, you have got some debt because of your horse and stuff, but arguably you're earning money. So it might be that you could look at getting a bit of therapy. And often with things like schema and EMDR, it's much more short term than longer term psychotherapist, for example. That could be an opportunity to do that. Secondly, look, emotionally abusive and controlling parents. As an adult, again, this is not me saying that you need to be judged for that statement at all. But what I'm going to try to do is just unpick it a moment. So as a child, we cannot deal in a way where we are empowered with the world to change the world in a way that we would do as an adult. So as a child, if you have emotionally abusive and controlling parents, there is very little you can do because you need them to eat, you need them to live, and so on and so forth, and you don't have the level of control that you would have over your environment if you're an adult. It changes as we become an adult. It's as simple as that. So you need to change from being the mode of child, which is where you are right now, where you're being controlled and in your belief system abused by your parents. You're in a scenario where you still believe that they have a right to that, and they don't. Now, it's hard because you've had a lifetime of growing up in these modes and learning that this is how you operate in this family dynamic, and they've got used to treating you that way because that's how this dynamic works. So you need to create an adult dynamic with your parents, and that means refusing to be controlled emotionally and refusing to be abused. And whilst on one level it's like, how do I do that? On another level it's like, well, you won't know until you start trying to do that. And that can be intimidating and scary, and it can be worrying, and there might be some negative consequences because, of course, they might not like that, and that mean that in the end you might need to think about moving out. But what it will also do potentially is change the dynamics of the relationship where they cannot act that way, and so it changes the way that they are around you on one level. Or let's say the worst comes to the worst and it's like, right, actually we're not going to be able to work together as a dynamic anymore. You then step out of child state into a more adult state, which means that the debts and things like that get managed better. Because if you're getting yourself into spiraling debt because you're living with your parents and you're not taking full accountability and responsibility for your worldview and what's happening within that, then chances are you're acting in a way that isn't in accordance with adult values that you really have because you develop them, you work, and so on and so forth. And instead you're operating this child mode. So by bringing yourself into a position where you grow up through I need to not be in debt. I need to accept that this horse is really important to me, and I want to figure out a budget where I can do that. But you're prioritizing the things that you do need, the things that you don't need, you can cut back on and work that forward. Because at the moment it feels like you're stuck in a bit of the child state where mum and dad still get to control you, but you're still accepting that controlling. You're a grown up, and that means you have to grow up the relationships around you. The reason I'm saying about therapy and getting it now is, even though it would be some investment and there may be some debt that you've got already that you don't really want to get into anymore, you have to say, well, what is more important to me? Is it more important to actually spend this, £500-600, which is something that I would like to spend on my horse, or do I need to think that I am the most important thing? What is the adult thing to do right now? Is the adult thing to actually think about what you really need and deserve? And what you really need and deserve is healing and a sense of being compassionately heard and learning to manage the trauma in a way where you're not completely stuck in the headlights, and growing up the relationships with your parents so that they can no longer operate in that mode and you no longer operate in the child mode. They're things that I'd explore doing without a doubt. And when it's a traumaversary, by the way, think about it in this context. The trauma is always there. It's always to some degree a traumaversary because you've always been through it. If you're seeing a day as a powerful day, then you can desensitize yourself to that by saying that day has no more power than any other day. Like, I'm not going to give that day my power anymore. It's time to accept that the trauma is something in the past. It still haunts me. There is pain, there is collateral damage, there is scar tissue being formed, but it doesn't own me because you're a survivor now. You're not a victim. And moving through that victim mode to a survivor position is really powerfully important, because you are in control, then you have the power, and nobody has a right then to disarm you in any way that's going to affect that, fracture that foundation. Hi Emma, my husband is in a really dark place. I'm sorry. He suffers from depression and anxiety. He's had medication and therapy before, but he came off medication and says therapy doesn't work. I feel differently, as he was so much better. Things have escalated over a period of months and he's really disconnected and low. I don't know how to reach him. I've asked what he needs and offered to go to the doctors with him like before, but he's declined and is ignoring me. I left an assessment on the table from a course I attended and he's completed it and his score isn't good. He's worked permanent nights and is now doing overtime, so I find it difficult to find a moment to talk properly to, and without my daughter being there. Any advice would be welcome to help him and our relationship, as I want to help, but I feel so angry at times with him, as it feels like I'm a single parent, but I feel bad for feeling angry as I know he's not well. Coming from Middlesbrough, where suicide is so high, I'm worried he does something silly sometimes. It's like talking through glass, if you know what I mean. Yeah, I completely know what you mean. So there's a few different things there. The first one is props to you for leaving the assessment there, and also for acknowledging that this is a really difficult time for him and trying to be patient. I think they're really difficult things to do. Patience is a virtue, it really is. And whilst the gift of patience is patience, it's really challenging to cultivate that, because you want your family to work well. You want your child to be brought up in an environment where the parent is enjoying the time that they spend with them. And the fact that that's being denied you ultimately at this moment in time is going to be really difficult. So that's completely acceptable to have the frustration. The fact that in spite of that frustration, you're still trying to champion him and help him to understand that you're there and that you'll support him is really, really important. And believe me, it might not look like it's going in with him, but it is going in with him. Secondly, try and get rid of that really fearful thought about suicide. And I'll tell you why. It's not because it isn't a risk. Of course, when somebody is depressed, there is a higher risk of suicide. Of course, it would be amiss and wrong for me to say that that wasn't the case. But the idea that you have some power to control that kind of outcome means that you would be carrying all of the power that he needs to take for himself, and it would be misplaced because you couldn't actually utilize it in a way where it made a difference. So it's more like, okay, if I start thinking about suicide and him killing himself, I'm just going to feel powerless and defenseless and helpless. Let's just bring it back to what can change, what can you do? He's had therapy and he's had help from the doctors, and you felt he was way better. So what has happened that's made him change his mind? Because what it could well be is that when he was having therapy and when he was taking the medication, if he was having medication, he did feel better. And that was notable by you. And he even himself felt this level of confidence growing. And there is nothing more terrifying when suddenly you realise that in spite of all that, it's come back. Now, in that moment, you can go, okay, so this is strategic now. I know that when I work the plan with my therapist and with my medication, or whatever it is that they agreed to do to make it better for him, when I agree to do that, I get better, I feel better. But that takes work, and when you're depressed and exhausted, particularly when you're working long shifts and all those things, the idea that this is you that needs to do the work can feel really overwhelming. So it can be kind of easier to go, okay, well, all that stuff I invested in, it hasn't worked, because even though it worked then, it's not working now. And that is a very easy cycle to create. So he needs to realize, like, actually, you suffer from depression. Now, depression, for some lucky people, comes once in a lifetime, and it is a large proportion of people who have depression, actually. It comes once in a lifetime and it never happens again. It's a large proportion of people. But for those who it comes back to, it's something that you have to acknowledge will be around occasionally, potentially for the rest of your life. And that's okay, because you get better at working your plan. But what he's done is he had the plan, it worked, and then he's gone, screw that. It's come back, he's resentful, he's upset, he's scared, he's frustrated. So he's going to deny that that had any impact because he's exhausted and upset that it's happened. So they're things that would be really helpful for you to kind of highlight and just sit down and say, look, I fully understand why you must feel so frustrated after doing so unbelievably well and really getting yourself to a point where things felt good and you feel let down now because it's changed, and that must be scary. But actually, you're misreading that situation. Everything you did was brilliant and it made a massively positive difference, and it's there to do again. It's just, you know what, we just have to work hard again at this stuff and reinstitute those coping strategies. Just get him to see it in that way. Also, shift work's a nightmare when it comes down to mental health and depression. There's a massive connection because of the fact that firstly, you're not getting the white light on your skin on a daily level, which means that you've not got the regulation of melatonin and serotonin in the brain, which means that your sleep pattern can be really irregular, which means that you just feel lethargic and quite down. Add to that the fact that he's probably leaving in the dark, coming home in the dark, then sleeping in the day. He's not going to have the right kind of chemical balance going on in his brain. What can you do about that? Well, there are things, but he's going to have to commit to it. So it will mean potentially getting a white light box, like a phototherapy lamp, off one of the shopping channels, or speak to your doctors to recommend a particular one that is going to be good. You sit in front of that for about 20 minutes when you wake up, 20 minutes before you go to bed. That will make a difference. Loads of omega-3 foods, lots of that you can get into your system, because that's really helpful. Take some vitamin D. Some people would also say take some vitamin B and vitamin C as well. It's not going to do any damage. Things like iron can also be really helpful, but again, with iron, it might be worth checking out that his levels with the doctor are all right, or whether they do need some help. So they're kind of things that I would suggest exploring as well. Meditation will help, mindful practice will help, doing some exercise will help. These are all things that will clinically help, much more actually most of the time than a lot of the tablets that you'll get prescribed. What I've just said will be really effective, and to some degree it will also help him feel that he's got a routine because he's actually following a plan around how to get his health back in check. But bringing it back to the fact that he's just disillusioned with the therapy and with the idea that things will change, that's just a normal response when you get depressed again, because you're like, I don't want to do this again, I don't want to go through it again. And everything that you're doing is great. If there's something that in the future he could look at doing, then maybe if he could look at working different shifts. I'm just saying, if he's a sensitive person to the way that the environment is, that shift work can be a little bit more challenging than it would be if he was working the 9 till 5 job. But that's something that your family would have to discuss. Nonetheless, just try to reframe what he's gone through with the therapist and stuff, and help him see that that's about picking up that tool bag again. And like I said, props to you for just having the patience to stay and do that stuff, because that's really, really important. I don't know whether there's a group of guys that meet, but it's Teesside area. Middlesbrough isn't Teesside, is it, Pete? Oh, is it Teesside? What's Mike's? I don't know. I'm not paid enough to know that stuff. I'm not paid enough to know whether Teesside's in Middlesbrough. It sounds like it would be, but I just didn't want to not, maybe say it and it wasn't there.
You've heard me say Teesside.
Yeah, well, there's in that area, but again, because of shifts, it might be a problem. There's a guy called Mike McGrowther, and he runs a group, Mike McGrowther, and he runs a group. Pete will have a look and put it on the bottom of here, and it's for guys, and all they do is just go to the pub as a big group, and it's for people who struggle with mental health, and it's meant to be awesome. He also does loads of projects like singing and stuff like that. But he does proper good stuff. He's like a singer in the Wildcats of Kilkenny, which is like a band that your end is about. It's known very well there. But he runs projects for guys, and they have so many people turn up, and it does really, really, really well. So have a look at that. Pete, can you just move that a little bit because I can't see any questions? Thanks. Hi, Emma. Hi, Em. For various physical and mental health reasons, I've become increasingly isolated over the last few years, but I'm incredibly close to my parents who live nearby. My dad had a terminal diagnosis a couple of weeks ago. Oh, I'm sorry. And my mum, who has MS, and my brother, paranoid schizophrenic, are increasingly reliant on me as a sounding board and to be pragmatic and help them deal with things. Unfortunately, as I have no friends, I have no outlet of my own, and I need advice in dealing, as if I do sometimes want somebody to talk to, I pull away as I don't want to put my crap on them. Sorry for wordiness. You don't need to be sorry. That was not wordy. It was very specific and well done. So, a few things. You're great at having relationships. You're not just great at having relationships. You're so great at having relationships that your nearest and dearest just want to talk to you about their issues. They want to explore them with you. You're a good sounding board. You're clearly an empathic person. You've got compassion and you're willing to give people time. You are a great friend. The fact that you've isolated yourself because of physical and mental health issues, well, that can change. And that's the advice that I'm going to give you. Because, I mean, I can dress it up a million different ways, but you can change it. Physical and mental health issues are not a reason to isolate yourself, because there are lots of people in similar situations and they would benefit from having you around because you sound like an awesome human being. So what are you going to do now? Well, I would get the app Meetup. Genuinely get it. Download it. Join some groups. Talk to people. They are online, but they meet in real life. If it's about disability, do that. There's so many different things you can do. But don't stay isolated, because clearly you have an amazing amount of talent for people relying on you and talking to you. That's a great thing. And you can utilize that for your benefit in finding relationships with other people and hanging out with people who just connect with you and also who you can share your stuff with. And the other thing is, you said about, like, you don't want to be a burden, so to speak. That's what you're saying when you don't want to tell people what you're thinking and feeling for fear that they won't be able to cope with it. No, that's not the reality of relationships. Relationships thrive because of that. When I think about who are the most important people in my life, I'm not like, oh, great, they're the people I'm going to get drunk and dance on tables with. Like, they're great people to have in your life, but they're not the people I think are the most important in my life. The people who are most important in my life are the people that when I'm on the floor, I can just call and they can just hold me and tell me that I'm loved and cared for and that they're there for me. And it's the same when they do that to me. It's an investment and a trust basis. It tells me that I am worthy and they are worthy, and together we share this worthiness between the relationship and we accept each other, the good and bad, the right and wrong, the up and down. That's the way it is. So you need to think about that, because it seems to me like a lot of people are missing out on a potential relationship with somebody like you who is awesome. And know some boundaries as well when it comes down to your brother and your mum. It's really difficult to be dealing with your dad dying, because when you've got a terminal diagnosis, people often think that that's just like weeks or whatever, isn't it? But actually it can be years. You know, people can have a terminal diagnosis and go on for a very long time. There can be an uncertainty around that, which can make it really difficult because you don't know when you're going to be managing the loss. So you're ultimately living with the person who's living and wanting to give them the best life possible, whilst also constantly contemplating their absence when they're gone. And that can be really difficult, particularly if you've got mental health issues like your brother. So it's great that you're a sounding board, but you also need some space and time for you. So don't be afraid to kind of like withdraw a little bit and give yourself nurture and time and kindness, because that's going to be important too. But it's time for you to meet some friends, and the ones that you have got, the ones that you just hold back from investing in, don't. It's a gift. Friendship's a gift. And like when people invest in us and tell us their darkest secrets and their biggest pain, it's like a real privilege. Give somebody the privilege of knowing you, warts and all. We all have them. We're all beautifully broken in a billion different ways. Let somebody in to see that. That's really important. Also, I got an email before a few days ago. I know you'll be on because I said that I would cover this and I didn't do it at the top of the show, so apologies for that. But you told me that your 14-year-old boy has had a conversation with you and he's concerned that he may not be the gender that he was born at, and that you are feeling understandably conflicted about what that means. You also said that you were very kind to him when he expressed that. You were very accepting of that. You told him that you loved him whatever, and so on and so forth. But obviously it's a massive thing to hear, and it's really a big deal. And I really despise the way that we are making parents feel bad for struggling with this kind of stuff from time to time, right? The idea that your child tells you something momentously large, like, I don't think I'm the gender I was born with. I don't think that the gender I was given and assigned at birth is my gender. And that a parent is just going to be like, that's great, don't worry about it, let's get you socially transitioned and so on and so forth. That's not real. And a parent shouldn't feel bad for feeling conflicted. It doesn't mean you're not going to be incredibly supportive and do whatever it takes for your child to get the help that they need, and that you want the child to be the happiest and healthiest they could ever be, no matter what that means. It's still an adaptation period for both parties. And again, we need to bring that right back to where it needs to be, because this is the beginning of a journey and you don't know where the journey is going to end. So what you did right was you went, I love you, I accept you, there is nothing wrong, nothing broken, You are perfect as you are. Whatever that ends up being, whoever you end up becoming, you are perfect as you are. That is the most important thing for any parent. And it's the same if a child tells you of their sexuality and, they might have a different orientation to you and they're struggling because they don't want you to feel like they've done something wrong. And the first and most important thing is, like, there's no difference. You're the same incredible shining light that you always were, and nothing you could ever tell me in this way would cause any conflict. And be who you are fully and embrace it. You deserve to be all those things that you want to be, and don't worry, kind of thing. That's the right response. But when it comes down to the trans situation, you're right at the starting post and you don't know where that's going to end. So this idea that somebody says, right, mum, dad, I'm trans, and that you then get them on hormone blockers and then you put them through surgery at some point after reassigning them to a different, the gender that they identify with, not the one they were born at. Like, the idea that that's just like some linear journey is just not true. It can be lots of different ways. Somebody may start off thinking I am trans, and then they may find out, well, actually, no, maybe I'm not trans. Maybe, I have some need to accept some trauma that I might have suffered, and I need to think about working that through. And then in the end, ultimately, they realise that they weren't necessarily that particular belief that they had initially. It can be that people go, I am definitely trans, and then they absolutely, without doubt, know that they're male or female, and they identify with the gender that they weren't born with, and they change to that gender, and it's a process which they embrace and that they feel so comfortable with. For others, it can be a journey of lots of conflict. And I think that what we need to do before we do anything about the bigger decisions is try to get some help, because your child needs to be able to sit down with an independent person. And I don't just mean as in, oh yeah, you've said that you're this, this and this, therefore you are that. I think it's more about like therapeutic exploration. Like, what is it that they feel? When did those feelings arrive? What is their idea about what it would be like if they decided to transition? All those things need to be explored safely and in a way where that child feels like they're able to fully explore, so that if they do realise, well, actually, no, I'm definitely female. I'm male, but I'm definitely female as far as I'm concerned. That's how I feel like I've got the brain of a woman as opposed to that of a man. Then they've done that work and they've reconciled that that's the right opportunity and choice for them. Whereas it could be through therapy that there is a different outcome, and that should be equally as valid. So the most important thing is that when you are a parent and you're offering them that kind of foundational support, which is, listen, you can come back home, be with us whenever for the rest of your life, however you identify for the rest of your life, you are enough exactly as you are, and with every spectrum that you decide to try, whether that's hair colour, whether that's clothing, whether that's wanting to see whether you fit into a certain sexuality, or whether it's to do with the fact that your gender is wrong, and all those things, as long as you let them know that come what may, they are adored and valued and loved and enough, then they've got a great place to begin exploring. They really have. My friend has a really gorgeous boy, and we call him gender creative. He's only 8, but he just really likes girls' clothes and has worn them pretty much since he could select, and he looks awesome in them. And the truth is, he still fully identifies as a boy. And it's really important that nobody tries to kind of push anything onto that child just because he's wearing girls' clothes. We can't then go, all right, well, we are assuming that this child is A, B, or C. It's like, no. The child needs to figure out what that is and where that is and how that feels. And all we can do is just let them creatively explore their world and let them know that that's good enough, however it is for them, and leaving that open dialogue so that they never feel that there's any shame or guilt associated with choices that they might want to make, if they want to make them, when they want to make them. And that's the key, and you're doing that. But don't think that there's anything wrong with having conflict about those feelings. Every parent wants their child to have the easiest route. And, for people who are trans, it's so challenging because of the fact that it's not the easiest route for them. It is for them, as in psychologically and physiologically in the long term. But, to actually be confronted with that as a young person, to feel like, why isn't it as simple for everybody? Everybody deserves a simple experience. And I think that so challenging for so many reasons when you have to have something that, even though in the end you'll be happy with it, there's a journey and other people don't have to go on that journey. And it's the same for a parent. It's like it's not because you're denying it or rejecting it or abandoning the reality. It's that you're going, I just wish it was easier because I love my child and I want it to be easy for my child. That's it. You shouldn't feel any guilt or shame about having those feelings. And it will be a parallel experience for your child who shouldn't have to go through that. It should just have been much more simple, Nature screws up sometimes, unfortunately, no matter what. Hence why people get born with issues that they have no control over. Anyway, that's what I'd say. Definitely support your child as you are doing, but let them have some creativity, explore it in therapy. And then obviously there are places that specialise in this, and actually speak to your doctor. CAMS is a good one because CAMS are good at kind of like speaking to young people who are kind of trained in this area, and it is worth getting on a waiting list just because, one, for your child, it can make them feel like, well, something's changing, something's happening, but also it can be a few years. A few years before you'll get seen because of the fact there is a massive waiting list. But like I said, that shouldn't stop work happening, because exploring and therapeutically going through the way that somebody feels is something that could be done really early on. And that's without any pressure on any decisions, quite the contrary. Just like this is how I feel, okay, you tell me how you feel and let's work this through. They're things that I'd say. Emma, concerned mum here. My son 13, diagnosed with ASD, suspected ADHD and a rare neurological condition and severe learning difficulties. Up until 3 weeks ago, he was displaying some learnt natural challenging behaviour. Then an incident happened at school where he ended up in school with quite a serious head injury, being dealt with by myself. Since then, his behaviour has been impeccable, but he's always been a skin picker. First it was his nails, then the skin by his nails, then his hair badly, which we managed to cut so he couldn't, and now he's turned to fresh skin. He's making himself so sore. I feel that it's potentially a masking coping mechanism of the impulsive behaviour he was displaying beforehand. Does that make sense? I'm awaiting contact from a mental health team, like waiting for Christmas, and the worry is understandably causing me sleepless nights. Please help a single, very stressed out mum. It's great that with the trichotillomania you managed to get his hair so short that he can't pull, but as you know, same with the nails, when you've got a strategy, a coping strategy, the thing is, if you don't have it anymore, you're going to transfer it unless you've worked through the thing that is causing you that. Now, I would say arguably the anxiety is causing it. So even though he's not been diagnosed with anxiety, usually with things like trick and nail biting and skin pulling, it tends to be anxiety based. So you say masking, and I think that's a good way of exploring it. I would say a soothing, distracting technique. So when we see people picking or pulling the hair, even though for most of us that would be quite painful, it doesn't appear to do. It almost gets them into a state of mental flow where they soothe themselves, a little bit like a mindful practice really. And yeah, it's destructive and it causes damage, but it's effective. It's a soothing strategy and a calming technique. So he's doing that because he's anxious. So the fact that we've now got insight into the fact there's potential anxiety there, it's like, okay, what is he anxious about? Now, he's got some neurological issues, he's got severe learning difficulties, but for some reason, he's had a serious head injury and then his behaviour has become impeccable. Now, again, I don't know what's happened there, because arguably, if we're talking brain damage, neurological issues, then a bang on the head could arguably, I suppose, do something to that, because a bang on the head can do a lot of things like inflammation to the brain and things that can cause different neurological responses, which I suppose could to some degree change behaviour. Or it could just be that that incident isn't about brain issues, it's about behaviour issues, and that consequence, whatever happened to him in school, was so big, it's transformed the way that he's behaving, and he's getting loads of positive feedback for behaving really well, and this is a good thing, but he's now figuring out how to displace the anxiety, and that's why the resurgence of this picking behaviour is getting more serious, because he doesn't want to retaliate, doesn't want to go back and return to the behaviour prior that you saw, and he's learned that he can do it better no matter what his difficulties are. And so he's now translating it because he's feeling anxious, and the outlet that might be to throw a tantrum or to shout or do any of the things that would have been problematic, he's not using now. So I mean, when it comes down to skin picking, things like oil on the hands makes it very difficult, because even biting is going to be more of a problem if you've got some kind of oil on the hands. So you could look at that. Again, things like gloves people will often use if they've got picking behaviours. Let me just say, he's turned to, fresh skin. So that can be helpful. But also, I mean, the old things like, elastic bands around the wrists so that they can play with those, holding ice in the hands so that kind of it gives them a real deflection of doing the actual picking and actually concentrates on the hands being really cold. And I kind of find it quite painful, but people kind of find it really soothing. There's also an app called Calm Harm, but I don't understand about his learning difficulties and whether they're maybe too extreme for that. Calm Harm is a good one in the fact that it helps people to kind of displace the way that they're dealing with their behaviours that cause them harm, and instead they use the app to work through it. Anything that can reduce anxiety per se. So arguably, I don't mean going online and distracting yourself on games and things like that. I'm talking about actually getting away from that stuff, soothing music, calming lights, warm baths, listening to nice music. Like, I would genuinely go for something like classic contemporary, like Einaudi is a brilliant pianist, or Riopi or Femi Gao. They're all ones that I would say on a mental health level are really, really helpful and soothing. And lots of patience, of course, all of those things that you no doubt impart right now. Because if you can bring down the anxiety, then you can help them not require the coping soothing mechanisms that he's using right now. I'm really interested in the fact that he got a bad bang on the head, and this seems to have changed his behaviour though. And that might be worth discussing if there's a consultant surgeon that you're speaking to, or a consultant who's in neurological kind of areas, or like neuroscientists or whoever it is, if they can look into his brain, because it could be an interesting kind of experience to just kind of explore whether something's happened there. But it's interesting that his behaviour's changed, because again, it could just be a response to a rebuttal, shall we say, because something went badly wrong and he got harmed, and it's kind of taught him something. So there's a real learning mechanism there, and that's a good thing, because it means with the calm harm and with the actual soothing and the way that you change the dynamics by bringing down his anxiety, that you could learn quite quickly to just manage and manifest his behaviour in a more positive way. And I suppose the other thing that you could do, you could look at some real rewards. So like making it very clear that, not by the way to say, if you don't pick, because that's a problem, it makes you fixate on it. Instead, it's like, if he isn't, or if he's managing periods of times without it, reward that. They're like, oh, I'm really proud of you, you're doing really, really well with this, and I've noticed that you seem to be quite calm, and you do that so that you reinforce the actual response to the actual absence of the behaviour, as opposed to that I am noticing your kind of, don't do this, like don't do that is not a good response, like don't do that kind of makes people fixate on it. How do you protect yourself from bullying if you've been bullied before and are quite vulnerable or left traumatised? Don't want to come across weaker or not confident, but how do you not let it affect you? Any advice is so helpful. So to some degree, you can't protect yourself from bullies, because bullies are everywhere. You can protect yourself from the way you respond to bullies. So you're going to meet them all the time. They'll be the ones who tell you that you've got stupid ideas, bulldoze you, make you feel small, slag you off, bitch behind your back. They exist everywhere, right? So you can't control that, but you can control the way that you respond and react to it. So I would argue that if, a good example, somebody was being nasty about me and I heard about it, then I'm not a conflictual person, but I would go over to that person and I would make sure I had a witness, and I would say, we'll call her Jenny, for Jenny's sake. Jenny, I've heard that you've been saying A, B and C because so-and-so told me, so be very specific. And obviously, I just want to be able to have a conversation with you about the fact that you obviously have issues with me, so let's resolve them. Because then I've surfaced the sniper, I've diffused the opposition to some degree, because she can't now go and tell other people, because I've just done it in front of somebody else who's now going to be able to validate that I challenged her about her bullying, and I've evidenced where it came from, and I've shown her that I am not somebody that she really wants to take on. It doesn't mean I'm not scared doing it. It doesn't mean that I don't feel fear and a bit of like worry about the hostility and conflict that's going to come. But the point is, she doesn't know any of that. She doesn't know about my internal conversations with myself. She doesn't know that I might be panicking inside. All she knows is, bloody hell, not going to take her on, because she has just literally challenged me, and now everyone in the office knows that she's not afraid of me and that I've been caught out. When it comes down to somebody like a radiator, so radiators are more difficult people than bullies, but nonetheless, it can be really difficult when you've come across one. So radiator is somebody when you say like, oh, I've got this great idea, and you express it at work, and then they like just bleed the life out of it by telling you how many problems there are with that and how it's never going to work. And that can be really demeaning and really upsetting. But the antidote to that is to just say, oh, okay, you tell me what you think the right decisions or solutions are. And it floors them because they're never used to being on the spot. They see their role as just totally decimating other people's opinions to seem aloof and better, superior. Once you say, okay, well, now you've just got rid of all of my ideas that were all kind of well thought out, but never mind it. You tell me yours. And again, they go, ooh, best not take her on next time because she's going to put me on the spot again and I'm going to look stupid. When it comes down to a bully we call them a bulldozer. A bulldozer is somebody who you'll say something and they will shout at you. They will literally just be like, no, that's the wrong thing to do, or why did you do that? They'll be the individual who comes and really has a go at you in front of everybody else because that's their power play. They've got used to being able to get away with things like that. With a bulldozer, again, you just stand your ground and you just say to them, I'm not willing to have a conversation with you whilst you're acting this way. You need to go away and you need to calm down. And then when you're ready, you can come over here and have a civil conversation with me, and you shut them down. So the bulldozer isn't used to that. They're used to rolling over people and making them cry and feel terrible or leave. And instead you stand firm. You make it clear that you are an absolute peer and that they won't get the better hand of you. Like I said, inside you might be dying, but they're not going to see that. So what you do with bullies always is you diffuse them. That's what you do. So if you come across them, you think about, why is this person acting the way that they're acting around me? What are they trying to achieve? And then you give them the opposite. And that's usually a very healthy and good way of dealing with bullies per se. And aside from that, you should always be aware that in most organisations, as long as they're bigger than kind of just working in a shop or, a little shop, for example, or a little cafe, most places have like HR departments, and they have things like occupational therapy involved with that, occupational health. So you can arguably do it the strategic way as well and go through the ranks and say like put complaints in. But the big thing for me is always think about how you can control the world around you by acting in a way in accordance with what you know will diffuse that person. My perpetrator is due to be released from prison in May, and I'm terrified. He was sentenced to 9 years on a Section 18. This is 4 years ago. My mental health is already low. Can you advise me on any coping mechanisms, please, Emma? Look, it would be wrong of me to say that there's some kind of coping strategy to just bring it out and go, well, you should just be fine with your perpetrator walking around. It's a horrible feeling. It's a feeling where you are a victim who wants to be a survivor, and you've been doing that and living that for 4 years, and now suddenly you feel like somebody's taking your safety away. And it's a very rational feeling, albeit it will be temporary. You'll get used to it and you'll be okay because you survived whatever you've been through, and the reality is that you'll survive again. But you're going to have some fears about that. There's a few things that I'd suggest. So first of all, I'd speak to the police. I'd have a conversation with them about a safety arrangement, not because you'll need it, but because you want to kind of sit down with them and say, okay, listen, this person's getting out. They went down for a very serious amount of time and they're coming out after half the sentence, and I want to know that I'm safe. Tell me whether there are steps that can be taken so that I can feel really, really safe. Secondly, I don't know how closely you live to your perpetrator or where they're going to be. I would hope it's not in the same locality. You don't want to be banging into them all the time. If that is going to be the case, again, how can you make sure you feel safe when you go in certain places? And have you got a buddy system where there are people that you can hang out with and who go places with you at times where it will make you feel more secure, at least in the early days? Most importantly, what is going to be your attitude towards this individual? Because you have power over them. You sent them to prison. They are not in control anymore. You put them away. Not just that, they are going to be on license. So that means that if they step out of line, if they so much as do anything to you, in any way, shape, probably look at you wrong, they'll be hauled back into prison. You have a huge amount of power. So, excuse me. So knowing that huge amount of power means that instead of panicking about this, you can start feeling, actually, you know what? I didn't just survive. I didn't just make it through that horrible event. I actually put this person down, and I can put them down again. And that in itself should be the mantra that you play. Reframe it in that respect. But just know at the very beginning of this, it's not going to be easy. It isn't going to be easy. It would be wrong of me to say that, because you've actually been in a situation where you've been through somebody getting charged, somebody being sent down, and now somebody getting out. And they're big feelings. There's a grief process about your world on different levels there. And hopefully you've got some kind of therapeutic intervention and some help. But like I said, speak to the police. Create a safety plan for yourself, just for your own peace of mind, not because you need it. And know that if they so much look at you wrong, if you did come into contact with them, then they're going to be hauled back to prison. And they're probably going to want to avoid that. And you have gone from being their victim to the survivor. And you're not just the survivor, you are the person who literally had power over them. And that's a very powerful mindset to have. Hi Emma, I'm really struggling with having started therapy. I knew it would be hard, and I know I need to do it, but I'm just finding it so hard. I'm reverting back to destructive coping strategies even more, and I'm feeling so sad. I don't know what my question is, but do you have any advice on this? Thank you. It's obviously really challenging when you go to therapy, which is going to help you, and you suddenly start triggering certain feelings from many years ago. So this is something you have to take to therapy. It really is. You have to sit with your therapist and be honest. And it's a challenge, because when you have got to a certain point in your coping, and then you finally go to therapy to start exploring it, and you want to be empowered, you want to feel hopeful, you want to feel like you're achieving whatever it is you set out to achieve, you believed you were fully ready, and so on and so forth. And then suddenly you start talking about it, and it triggers you, and you feel like you're back where you were in pain, and you suddenly feel like you've let yourself down, and you haven't. It's like that sense of you have to go through the worst to get better is often very true. You have to face your demons before you conquer them. A lot of us live in a state of denial, avoidance, distraction, and it's because we're trying to cope with things that require attention. But because we haven't got the resources and the tools and the safe place and the strategies, we carry on doing all those things I've just said. And then we find ourselves in therapy, and it's like, well, actually, this is a place to purely explore that, and to stop hiding and avoiding and distracting, and to just confront it head on. But of course, that takes us back to a place of pain. And to find the strategies that are going to help us cope with that, we have to be willing to confront them. We have to be willing to acknowledge them. And we do that best with therapy by saying to our practitioner, since starting therapy, I feel like I've really gone to a place where I'm struggling with quite a lot of these triggering experiences. And I'm feeling like I'm losing my foundations. And I'm feeling like I don't know how to cope anymore. Like I feel like I'm reverting to some really bad coping mechanisms. That's what you do in therapy. You talk about that stuff. There's no point having therapy unless you're going to be really authentic and pure and true. And it's not because you've let yourself down. You're not letting your therapist down either. Your practitioner isn't there to feel disappointed in you because you're struggling. They're there to understand that and compassionately attend that and to work through it with you. And what it is you're at a place now where you've decided to be brave enough and have the courage to explore things that are difficult. And you hoped that it would be easy, but you wouldn't be in therapy if it was. Because the point is you've arrived there because you know that something is needing attention. And now you're in that space, your brain and your body have gone, oh, okay, we're here. We can do this. Let's start. And you might feel that that is completely without any of your knowledge that it was going to occur. Like it just happened in spite of who you were. There was an unconscious response, you know? But actually that's not very unconscious. You've arrived in therapy. You know that things have been really difficult for you to arrive in that place. You're ready to explore it. It wasn't unconscious that you started to allow that to be. It was conscious. It's only because it's painful you're like, oh, maybe this has gone too quickly, too hard, and maybe I'm going to struggle because of it, and I'm scared now because I feel like I've lost my footing. You haven't lost your footing. You're in a place where you want to explore. So don't be afraid of it. Don't turn away from it now. Don't run away. Like sink into it. Swim in it. It's probably going to trigger you and it's probably going to give you some pretty challenging experiences, but it's also going to heal you. And you don't get to get the healing without initially the pain. You need to get that circumstance to create the change. That's powerfully important. And that's what will happen as long as you allow yourself that space and dialogue with your practitioner to be honest. You haven't gone back. The idea that you've gone back because you might have returned to some modalities of behaviour, that's not true. It's just not true. What has happened is those modes of behaviour have always been latent. They've been there. You haven't quite processed them. You haven't moved through them. They've been sleeping. Now they're active again. But as opposed to them going back to sleep this time, with work with your therapist, you're going to diffuse them. So you're going to render those coping strategies that are bad for you useless. They'll never be used again. That's the key. Otherwise, they'll always have been beneath the surface and you'll have always felt like it was a constant need to manage those feelings, probably exhausting at times. And that's because they were sleeping and you were aware they were sleeping. You were aware that they could get you at any point, they could be activated in any moment, and that you always felt that not quite safe because they lived within you. Therapy, when done correctly, when worked through effectively, when honestly and authentically expressed together with the practitioner and the patient or client, that's where you find, I suppose, the bomb disposal unit, and you switch them off. And then you don't even fear those coping strategies that are bad for you because they're no longer a part of who you are. They're redundant. And that's the key that you're going to unlock. And you can't unlock it without first returning to some of those modalities of coping that are destructive. So try not to feel like this failure that you're clearly feeling. You're not. You're just a very normal human being dealing with abnormal strategies that you no longer wish to have, and you need somebody to help you diffuse. Right, guys, I will see you soon. I will see you on Wednesday and Sunday if you come to my Kenny's Crime Cult on YouTube. Otherwise, I'll see you next Monday. Take care, my lovelies. And remember, as I always say, just all that division online, it's just not real. It's just not real. Majority of us all just want to live harmoniously with each other, and we'll fight for that. Take care.